Tonight, we're celebrating a new organization founded in 2011 called A Blade of Grass. A Blade of Grass is dedicated to funding and increasing the dialogue around socially engaged art. We're focusing on one of the most important aspects of social engagement tonight, everybody's social engagement, collaboration, with a panel that consists entirely of our grantees, which makes us very proud. We're honored to have Manon Sloan, president of No Longer Empty, as moderator of this evening's discussion. A Blade of Grass proudly supported No Longer Empty's blockbuster effort at the Andrew Friedman Home this spring, entitled This Side of Paradise. And if you didn't get there, I'm sure you can Google it. It really was fabulous. Joining Manon on our fantastical organizational grantees for 2012. Christina, I have to your names. Christina Vassallo, Executive Director of the Artist Collective International Artist Residency, Flux Factory. Michela Martigani, founder of More Art, which brings artists and non-artists to underserved communities together to create collaborative projects. And Stephen Duncombe, co-founder of Center for Artistic Activism, which develops and workshops creative approaches to activist communications. After the panel, stick around and help us celebrate Artist Files, our first grant to individual artists. This grant process is an experiment which we're very excited about. Blade of Grass is using this grant to actively think about what constitutes excellence in the emerging field of socially engaged art. We're doing this by opening up the grant-making process itself to public discourse. I'm not going to talk about that now, but I hope you'll all go and check Artist Files on our website and follow the conversation and perhaps even join it, because it's a new conversation as the socially active art is new in itself. So when the panel is over, please stick around, eat, drink, mingle with each other. I'm very pleased that tonight we have almost every single prospective individual artist grantee with us. And actually everybody in the room is very interesting, so talk to each other.
Stephen.
Yes.
So with a background in sociology and history and an extensive experience in public activism, what brought you first into the sphere of artistic collaborative practice? What was it about the art experience that you found powerful as a tool of organization? And then I'm going to ask you to address the first part of the title of the panel. What do you think of the ethics of collaboration? What do you understand by that term? And from your understanding, if you could speak a little bit about the ethics.
Sure, thank you. I'm not an artist, nor do I play one oftentimes. My background is in political activism. But I come to art for a very pragmatic and not very lofty reason, which is it works. The first rule of guerrilla warfare is know your terrain and use it to your advantage. And the political terrain today is an aesthetic and artistic one. That is, the political terrain today, the landscape, is one of signs and symbols, stories and spectacles. And arts and artists are actually particularly adept in working on this terrain. And so I come to the arts actually from a long career as being a political organizer. And starting out in when I was 17 years old, organizing these huge marches on Washington, which I didn't even want to go to myself. They were so dreary, and they were so boring, and they were so awful. And one of the things I realized living in Lower Manhattan was that there was another type of expression that was going on. There was art galleries that were opening, there was clubs I was going to, there was bands that were playing, DJs I was listening to, which I actually wanted to go to. And what I started to realize is that the idea that politics is this sort of rational, dreary business on one hand, and the arts on the other hand is this sort of this expressive, affective process on the other, those two things could actually be merged. And so how I came to the artistic process is really a very pragmatic reason, which is it tends to work, okay? Now the participation is the other part of that as well, is we don't live in an era, we don't live in a time, we don't have, live within this terrain, if you like my political metaphor before, of passive spectatorship. We live in a time of participation, where every advertisement, every website asks you to become part of it, okay? A lot of that's banal marketing, but it really is getting at this fundamental idea that we all are creators. And so participation, for me, as a political technique, not only works because it draws people in and keeps politics from being a story they're hearing, instead a story they're making, but as someone who believes deeply in democracy, it's actually at the heart of democracy is this notion that people are actually going to participate in the politics that surround them. So, the ethics part.
Can I just ask you a question in your first response? You know, as consumers, in terms of marketing, we're very passive. I mean, they want us to be passive. They want us to sort of create a subsumer message, and then, you know, sort of our only action is to respond to it.
Well, actually, they don't want us to be passive. They want us to actually be participatory, but participatory in a very particular and specific way.
Right.
That is, participate by buying the product,
right.
and therefore
Right.
completing the circuit. But no longer does the advertising world work on the assumption that you're going to listen to a 30-second something or another. You have to find yourself within that. Ideally, you will connect by clicking on this and taking part in some sort of survey. And to say that we can actually learn from marketing, there's a lot of very smart people in marketing. The difference is the type of participation that marketers are asking for, I would call unethical, which is essentially it all leads to one direction, which is buy the product. Whereas actually, if you're interested in creating sort of a more democratic politics, then we can ask for participation ethically, insofar as we're actually asking people to participate in the very processes which make up their lives.
So that
actually did ethics too.
Yeah, that did
Wasn't
ethics
bad.
too.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll actually get back to ethics in my third question, which sort of goes into issues of value and the marketplace where, you know, art is being sold. But thank you for that. Michaela. More Art was founded on the basis of your belief that art is a powerful tool capable of breaking down social and economic barriers while enriching people's lives. In your essay, Slow Art, you speak about nourishing the soul, an experience that should be shared with a much wider public than the art world itself often seeks to reach. I also noticed the work you did with Kim Suja, with the seniors, and with Pablo Helguera's Protest Club, both of which rely on the active participation of the artists with audiences. So I'm going to ask you, in the light of this, the second part of the panel, this question: what makes a collaborative process transformational, effective, or even beautiful?
Thank you. Okay, this works. So what we do at More Art is based on collaboration, everything we do. And we ask artists to collaborate with the community, or at least some members of the community, and then we collaborate with the artists, with the community, and with other organizations that usually serve the community. So there are always many participants in each project. And in both projects that you mentioned, Kim Suja and Pablo Helguera, addressed senior citizens in particular. Pablo Helguera not only, but mostly. And so there are actually very good examples of how the work could be transformative. It's very difficult. We have experienced working with senior citizens because there is a lot of barriers up, and sometimes maybe they don't trust our process, and that's totally understandable. And the challenge then is to try to convey the process and convey the goal that we have in mind in an effective way. And usually when that happens, then there is something magical that comes about. And with Kim Suja, for example, she worked with a group of seniors that went from people in their late 60s to people in their 90s. And she worked with video, and she let the camera just raw for a long period of time and in total silence. This after having had a very long conversation with the sitter. So the conversation was not recorded and it's not part of the work, but the person is, and you can actually read through their faces. And you feel, for example, the trust that has been created between sitter and the artist, and it's a very simple moment, just the two of them in a room. And then I would say that for that particular work, I think the word beautiful applies, because when you see the final video, there is something extremely meditative and beautiful about it. For other projects like Pablo Guerra, you have something completely different, but equally transformative. And for example, in that particular case, the Protest Club was a series of workshops where the artists addressed the genre of the protest song, which goes back to the Mexican War of Independence, etc. And it's a very powerful genre, which basically continues to change over time. So each generation usually takes songs that were very well known, quite popular, and then they change the lyrics by addressing new issues that are important at that particular time. So they did the same thing. They studied, the history, but then the people in the workshops, which were mostly seniors, but not only, rewrote some of the lyrics. And at some point, because we were so involved, instead of only the lyrics, they actually wrote brand new songs, and then a group of musicians helped them put in music. And then this was actually not part of the initial plan, which is actually another thing that's very interesting about collaboration.
It never turns out how you imagine.
Never.
You can't control it.
Exactly. And so you really need humility in all. It's one of the key aspects. But so because of these people were so involved, at the end we decided that there was this final concert on the High Line and in other places, and not only the musicians were going to perform, but also the participants. And the whole idea of standing in front of many people and sing and be part of the actual was really extremely empowering in most cases. And so that's the part that you were saying about transformative. And each project, we hope that each project is a bit that, and some projects are different, they're all different, and some projects are more than others. But that's always the goal. And so collaboration for us is essential, and I think it works if you have a real goal. So all the different people that are part of this collaboration, they have a shared goal, and it's very clear, because then each one brings something different to the plate, but you know where you're going, and you can renounce your ego a little bit, and you just in order to achieve what you intend to achieve.
And this notion of renouncing the ego and the artist in a way sort of pulling back to allow for the participatory process to happen. Christina, let me turn to you on this one, because you have spanned both the commercial world and the non-profit world, and in Flux, the organization is deeply, deeply committed to the collaborative process. But this is a question that, as I mentioned earlier, goes back to ethics. In the commercial world, a value, and then we're talking about sort of value, the halo value, and the market value is very much dependent on the stature of the artist. And in the collaborative process, the artist, as I say, steps back into this more communal body. And yet, when the work is in the gallery, it's back into them profiting. So could you talk a little bit about this whole notion of value and worth and try and make sense of it a little bit from both the commercial and from the not-for-profit?
Sure. Well, as you unveiled my dirty little secret, I used to work in the for-profit field, and it was a really difficult experience, one in which I felt one's creative contribution was never recognized, unless, of course, you were having a solo show. If you were the gallery worker, the director, you were sort of, what you did was never really noticed. And so coming to Flux was a redemptive experience for me, and the reason why I love Flux so much is because you can make the organization what you want it to be, not just me as the executive director, but our residents, our artists who exhibit their work with us and create work with us together. And volunteers even. I started as a volunteer, and then I became a curator at Flux, and now I'm the director. And so I felt like at every step along the way, if I had a good idea, and if it was feasible, we would make it happen. And I think that's the beauty of a place like Flux. We're creating this sort of, it originally began as an alternative to the commercial gallery scene, and it still is today. So we operate on this sort of consensus-based model, participatory governance, and I think there is a huge amount of value in that. There's also value in this, it's somewhat of an experiment, a social experiment as well. And I think there's a huge amount of value in removing the market pressure. We all have rent to pay, we all have bills, but at a place like Flux, the deliverables are not necessarily connected to dollar amount. So there's something really liberating in that.
And the creative freedom that all these models give to the artists.
Sure, and I think you were speaking about humility in the collaborative process, that this kind of freedom, there's so much room for unintended and unexpected results, which is really important. That doesn't exist, in very many places. So I think at all of, our organizations, we have a lot of room for that, which is really great.
So the panel has now covered those 3 questions. Not covered them. Let's address them. Let's address them. Okay, so now it's over to you. We have about half an hour, and I'd like you guys to be now the process. You can choose to be the moderator, i.e. you can take my place and ask the panel questions, or you can be a speaker, and you can send and say something that you would like to say about the participatory process or the issues. And I'd ask the audience, not the audience, the rest of us, we will become timekeepers, because I'd like to keep this, so as many people as possible can speak, to keep it from 1 to 2 minutes. So do we have people who would like to participate at this point?
Hi, my name is Emma, and I'm the assistant curator of projects at the Serpentine Gallery. I had a question. You mentioned briefly the question of authorship and value. I'd like to ask members of the panel a little bit more about that. I work on a project where over 3 years I work on 22 projects in a neighborhood in London called the Edgware Road. And for one example of a project is a collective Ultra-Red, which is partly based in the US, working with a group of 150 students in a school in the neighborhood over 3 years. When we had an exhibition in March of this year, we had a big question about bringing the work into the gallery. And when we did so, we had a lot of discussion with the directors of the gallery about how to name the authors of the work. And we managed to win the battle, and the label on the wall was half of the wall. And we managed to get every single name of the participants on the wall. And it was a huge achievement for us as curators of this project. And I just wanted to ask a bit about how this works.
I think the assumption when Flux Factory is an art collective, we make work together, we curate work together, we produce these big projects together. And so the assumption is if you come to see an exhibition at Flux, it was collaboratively produced. And we also, there are usually point people who manage the project, so they're listed by name. I think that was a major feat to get all of the participants listed on your wall label. And we try to do the same thing. Again, because we're a nonprofit and we operate on a shoestring budget, the resources are slim, but the credit is really high. So there's always, we always try to recognize the contribution in any way that we can.
Not very different, honestly, from what she said, but we have that problem come up all the time. And we often turn to the artist also, and we try to work it out with the artist and see how he or she is comfortable. Usually the artist is recognized first, and then we include all the participants. As you said, like in the project you mentioned, sometimes there are a lot of participants. So we make different choices in a way. So in an invitation, the postcard, we won't include everybody. We just include the members from the school so-and-so or the community center so-and-so. And then on the website or in further material, we actually have the names as well. So it really depends. And for example, with the students, sometimes we also need the permission from the parents. So that's another layer. You can't actually include the names unless they give you permission for that. But I totally agree that's always an issue, and it's important to address it in a fair way.
Our product is a bit different, I think. Our product is political campaigns, activist campaigns, which by their very nature are anonymous and sometimes purposefully so. In some ways, we don't have to worry about this problem because literally from the get-go, and this is one of the advantages of working within the political sphere, is we bring together activists and artists to really creatively construct campaigns, and construct campaigns with an aesthetic viewpoint from the get-go. But when it comes down to the final product is actually a process in and of itself. And if we're actually successful, it disappears. It actually enters into the community itself. And so in some ways we have the luxury of not having to worry about all this, because part and parcel of political activism is, if you're a good political activist, you make yourself anonymous. And you pull back from that and actually let the community take their name onto whatever they need to work on.
I think artists have a real problem being anonymous on the whole, and it is an issue. I mean, a lot of the work for our exhibitions works in this collaborative way. Mel Chin, for example, in our last exhibition, interviewed about 120 people in the Bronx with messages for President Obama. They're all included in the credits, and we had a special premiere at the opening where they were all invited. Mel Chin is a particularly sensitive artist to the nature of collaboration. His Funders project, for example, where he's working all over the United States in lead-contaminated communities, getting the people that live in those communities to create their own $100 bills. He gives them a template, and then they sort of draw in their own experiences into it, and they're being delivered to Congress for equal exchange. And he's very willing in that process to take a back seat. I think in the question I was asking before, when it comes to the gallery aspect, I think it's less problematic within the kind of context of how we exhibit art. I think once it gets into the market, it becomes extremely problematic, because that it goes back into the superstar system. You know, those people may be invited to the opening, but they very rarely share in any profits from the work. And I think it's something. I mean, this is all to be worked out, but I think it's something that really has to be addressed, because the work cannot be made unless it's collaborative, and therefore the reward should also be collaborative. But great question. Anybody? Next person.
This might not be a question for everybody on the panel, but I'm curious if you see a difference in the aesthetic outcomes of artworks that are collaborative versus those that are kind of solely produced. And maybe it's a good question that Christine could answer first, because she has a background in a commercial gallery where maybe the overt collaboration wasn't obvious, right? Or openly presented.
Yeah, I think, Flux, I wouldn't say we have a super specific or particular aesthetic, but we tend to veer towards the reuse of materials. So, you know, there's always this kind of DIY nature to the work that we produce. You know, we work a lot with materials for the arts, which is sort of like our fairy godmother. 90% of what we make is because of them. So, you know, a lot of the sort of larger scale, like grander collaborative works and installations that we do have that kind of reuse aesthetic to them. But, you know, just in terms of, and I suppose the concept also, like the breadth of ideas feeds into the aesthetic as well, because you have the experience and the literal handwork of more than one person involved. So, you know, oftentimes there's this sort of internal dialogue within this one piece that you might not get from a single creator.
I think, like most artworks, it's a gamble. You know, very often I've commissioned work that's a painting and it's disappointing, and you know, a collaborative work that you have no idea how it comes out. It may not work. I mean, it's like I'm opening up this panel to discussion. It may not work. It has an element of chance in it, which I think makes it exciting.
Yeah, I remember that, you know, Umberto Eco, a long time ago, wrote a wonderful work called Open Work, a book about open work, in which he talked about that essentially art, at least modern art, in its very essence is incomplete, and it is always completed in some sort of collaboration, mainly some kind of collaboration with the audience, but we can imagine also collaboration with other creators. But in order to do that, you have to give up a certain amount of control. And in that giving up control, you come up with things you would have never imagined before. And you also come up with horrifying and horrible mistakes you would have never made had it just been up to you. And so that's really the risk and the gamble of the sort of collaborative efforts.
It's human nature to want to see yourself in something. And so I think part of the ingredients of collaboration is that each person who's involved sees an aspect of themselves, right? And so the format and the forum matters, right? So if it's set up where we're in a listening posture, then we're going to listen. That's our participation. If it's set up in an open discussion where there's less control and it's more about sort of understanding who's in the room and what are we bringing to the table, then a real kind of participation happens. So I think just the nature of a panel makes it hard to facilitate a conversation because we're all in a listening posture, right? And it's sort of hard to understand who's even in this space and what we're bringing to it. So I think, you know, part of some of the questions that have been raised are just, you know, emblematic, right, of the structure that's required to even have collaboration.
I think social media, for example, has affected the way that this grant is taking place. You know, we're all in this together in a way that I don't think most grants are awarded. Like, it's very visible. We all, you know, have seen each other online. We all know what's going on. It's very like community oriented. So it's really nice not to feel like, you know, you're in a listening posture all the time, because when you're applying for grants, that's what you are. You're listening to what they're saying to you, and you have to respond to that, but it's not a conversation. And I think what's great about what's going on right now is that it is a conversation. But I do have a question, because what really interested me was what one of you was saying about how aesthetics affecting the political landscape, and just in regard to social media, and also egoic quandaries in regard to that is, my question is, how is social media affecting aesthetics, politics, and those egoic quandaries that we're all subject to, that are necessary to set aside in order to collaborate?
It entails a landscape, we keep going with that, in which there no longer can be the singular artist who speaks to a receptive audience. That doesn't mean it's going to disappear, okay? If you just walk down to the west side, we're going to see plenty of that. But it's actually bucking history. That world is over, essentially. And really what I'm much more interested in is how does one facilitate these sort of conversations that the woman who spoke before you was so interested in, which is how do we create forums in which these conversations can happen? How do we create forums in which these sort of collaborations can happen naturally? And it's not because it's going to come from the art world that this is going to happen. It's because it's already happening. And what the art world has to do, as the political world has to do, as we saw with Occupy over the past year, is sort of play catch-up to a world where everybody participates, and it's expected that the forum in which we participate is going to listen to everybody and come up with technologies, things like an Occupy the People's Microphone and those little hand signals and things like that, which actually speak to the problems of joint authorship. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think I missed part of your question, but.
In response to that, wouldn't it be, I'm so curious because I've been hearing and collaborating, I would say all my life, and being immersed in it, I would say for at least a decade. And I run a nonprofit residency program as well in New York City, and a lot of times I say that the era of the solo artist is totally over. But don't you think it might come back?
I don't think it's gone away. Well, what's the name of your collaborative?
It's called Residency on the Radio.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, and so here we are, we support individual artists that are in, I would say that the soul, if you look at the market world, it's very hard to find examples of collaboration. There are very few. There are few, there's some.
Well, I don't think that they are mutually exclusive, to be honest. And in fact, most of the artists we work with, they also work, actually, they primarily work independently. And it's for them, it's often very interesting to engage in something different, to push themselves a little bit. And often, in fact, it's very scary at first. It's a different way of working, and especially confronting yourself with someone who may have ideas that are very different from yours, and that's when all those variables we're talking about come in. And when you know that probably the project will never be exactly the way you envision it at the beginning. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way of working. I think it's an enriching way of working, and we have chosen to support that aspect because it's enriching both to the artists and to the people they work with. But I also think that a lot of the ideas then are developed by the artists still in an independent way. And they take a lot of energy from this collaboration, and then they sort of re-elaborate everything themselves. So I think both things should happen and continue, honestly.
If I go into that, there's also varying degrees of commitment to the collaborative process and your vocalness about it. I know so many artists who work until 5 a.m. in front of their computer screen by themselves, but in reality, they're connected through social media, they're sharing ideas, they're sharing content, etc. And then, also at a place like Flux, we try to nurture the individual practice as well. And I know artists who only work collectively and collaboratively, and then artists who occasionally work collaboratively. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really think it's gone, the solo artist, but I also think that might be a little bit of a misnomer, maybe, because can we ever really produce something that's completely separate from other people?
I still want to respond to what's been going on here, and I think it's really interesting because you're identifying something that we're all sort of participants in it. And I think that from us, being collaborative is really about identifying certain issues and then reacting to them and being participatory in that process. So it puts the onus on us as people that are in this comfortable position to actually be participatory and take control. And whether it be Mel Chin, people had the option of not participating in his film, and that was okay as well. So I think it's it's identifying, which I think is a major benefit to the process, as well as putting the expectations on the people in the room. And like you said, it's a conversation. It starts a dialogue or a conversation. So.
Just while you're moving the microphone, one of the things that I find that the most interesting topic that I'm finding is this notion of control, right? Control is such a satisfying thing to have, and what I'm wondering is you know, what's the, you were talking about value and you were talking about ethics and you were talking about aesthetics, right? And what's the value of losing control? What's the most amazing thing that can happen when control is lost? And what is the most dangerous thing that can happen when control is lost?
I just want to speak to that immediately because I'm not an artist and I work with an artist. My partner is actually out in Los Angeles right now. My partner in the center is a practicing artist. And it's fascinating working with him because his mind works completely different than mine. I'll give you a really banal example. We're on our way to Boston to give a lecture. And we're putting together our PowerPoint. And I think of PowerPoint slides as illustrative. He thinks of PowerPoint slides as associative. He had 95 PowerPoint slides for a 25-minute presentation. Some of them would make fun of us behind our back, okay? It really broadened my perspective and made me look at something a different way. But the key thing here is that we had to be working on the same project. That is, it wasn't about respect for his diverse perspective. It was that I had to actually deal with how he approached the very same thing that I was working on. I hope that some of my, how shall we say, anal and restrictive and control-ridden, rigor, I think is the positive way, kind of rubbed off on him as well. But I think it's exactly the willingness to say, okay, Steve, you're actually really good at this. I'm going to trust you on it. I don't understand it completely, but I'm going to trust you on it. And I think he does the same for me as well. But it really is, and it's a word that we haven't used, and I think you talked about it a little bit in your initial remarks, but trust. And the trust is so important for collaboration, whether it's between 2 or 3 individuals working on an artistic project, or whether it's between artists and a community in which they're working on larger social issues.
And actually, that's exactly what I wanted to say. And that's when you say you finally renounce control, what does come out of that? Well, a lot can come out if you can really trust the process, and that's the key. And they do all these exercises, about losing control, where you just
take the trust fall.
Exactly, take the trust fall, and that's exactly what you do in a collaborative project in a way. And you just have to trust the process. And ultimately, usually it works. I don't know exactly how. I wouldn't be able to explain it because I don't think it makes any particular sense. But usually it does. There is a way. At the end, it works out. So like when you are mounting an exhibition and you're 3 hours away and everything is a mess, and so it's not possible. And then for some reason, when it works, at the end it works. So I guess it's the same thing.
The alchemy of collaboration.
Yeah,
for sure.
That's a great way. That's a great way to put it.
For me, I know working collaboratively, I have mellowed out so much. You really, it's giving up the control. You cannot control every aspect. You have to have, yes. You look like you're about to jump out of your chair. Ready to respond to that?
Speaking of renouncing control, I was wondering if one of you would switch places.
Yes, I can.
Can I just finish this one thought though?
Yeah.
At its best, for me, it's like creating this depth in the work. At its worst, it's a totally
That's what I was hoping would happen,
experience.
yeah.
And maybe you don't even want to put your name on it at the end. That's okay. Can I ask the audience a question?
Yeah.
It's sort of going back a couple of questions ago. It was you over there. You were talking about working in the community, and I wonder for any of the artists in the room, if you feel that when you work collaboratively with the community or a set of people who maybe don't consider themselves artists, do you ever get the sneaking suspicion that you're exploiting them, and how do you avoid that?
Okay, so
Yes.
it actually moves back to what I wanted to say before about this whole conversation on control and around power. So it's fine to, I think you're right, you know, it's important to create a space in which a larger body of people feel empowered to participate. But I think the luxury of being an artist who can have a project in a community or whatever other context, the space to think about that puts you in a position of power where you're inviting other people, regardless of whether they're artists or non-artists, but other people who may not have the same level of authority, who may not get the same level of credit, who have a different intersection with whatever it is that you're trying to do. You're inviting them into a larger process and asking them to trust you. And so one of the first things, one of the ethics, the first piece of responsibility is to acknowledge that you have that space and then create an environment of equity. So it really can be a collaboration. Otherwise, it's more like you're marshaling other people towards your vision. And so it still is a sole artistic object kind of practice as opposed to a genuine collaboration.
I couldn't agree more.
Just, coming off of that last comment, for me, it's really about empowering the communities that I'm working with, and because I know that they're making an offer to me as an artist, but also how do I make an offer back to them? And that's so much a part of my work. I don't know how much of that also comes from the fact that I come from a family of activists, and my family has deep roots in the South African struggle and the Black liberation struggle, civil rights, etc. But that is that's so much a part of my heart. And then also I think that when I work when other artists invite me to collaborate, I also have to step up. I make sure I put myself in that position. For instance, when Hank Willis Thomas, Vyanti Ross Smith, and Chris Johnson invited me to do a Question Bridge, I went, I hate being in front of the camera, in terms of without control, and I had to just be there and be honest. And then they were gonna do whatever they did with the footage. And when I saw it, I was like, shit, it's like looking in the mirror in a way that, without the face I wanted to project. Right. And, but at the same time, it was just it was offering. And so it was really, so it's this tension. It's uncomfortability, but at the same time, it's this, you were talking about growth. So I wanted to say that.
I've done all these projects with communities for very little money, and I make my living as a teacher, which is notoriously exploited. And no one ever is is the community exploiting this artist? I've never heard that question on a panel discussion, and yet I have a lifelong...
We're talking about it now. Is the community exploiting the artist?
Kind of relationship to me navigating this terrain where it seems to me like people are trying to exploit me constantly. So, constantly. Because I love what I do, I shouldn't be paid for it, right? I should pay the rent with my love. That's all I want to say.
I organized 146 people to walk in the Triangle Shirtwaist Memorial procession, and I had all these volunteers work together to make these shirtwaists, and they just responded so beautifully, and it meant so much to them. And it was such an emotional attachment to it, and thinking of the names, we all sort of felt like we were the people building the cathedral, and we were all anonymous doing this. And I never felt that, they wanted to be such a part of this. So it was really a beautiful experience.
I've been thinking about this larger context of what is going on in our society as all this is happening. And I think one of the ways of describing what's going on in our society is that we have less debate, less dialogue, less trust, and certainly less real collaboration in a lot of areas, particularly in political and social affairs. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we've lost a certain robust resistance to authority and injustice and outrages that a lot of us had growing up 50, 60 years ago, and that aren't as much part of the environment now. And I think that what's hopeful about what we're hearing here today is that the artists are not behind, they're ahead. And they're trying to fashion ways of collaboration around the kind of joyful experience of being together in some other sort of way. And I don't know where it will carry us, but I do know that it seems to me hopeful and strong in a way that a lot of things in our society right now are not.
I feel like I'm living on a different planet from you, sir. I mean, literally, I feel like there's so much conversation. I have to tune out every once in a while. There's so much dialogue. I can't escape the conversation sometimes. And I certainly don't feel like the artists are ahead. I feel like we are scraping for every moment of recognition, every penny that we can find under the couch cushions. I'm not sure where this sort of stance of being ahead comes from. I feel like we're consistently under-supported. I don't know if anybody else feels that way.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that we have Twitter and Facebook and all of these things that we're constantly joining the conversation. We're constantly, you know.
And where does it get us?
Kind of nowhere, because everybody else is doing it too. So, I mean,
Well, just say conversation isn't necessarily dialogue or debate.
Right.
It's often debate.
Right. But the question is, does it shift the structure? That's the question, though. I mean, for all the collaboration, does it actually shift the structure?
That's a great last question. Does it shift the structure? Panelists?
The structures of, you know, and so the lady at the back was talking about, even in participatory art, you have a sense that, you know, there are inherent power relations. There are always inherent power relations between, you know, an artist and the gallery and the museum. I mean, that's one of the things that a lot of these organizations are really trying to create, is a level playing field for artists. And it often results in, you know, Nikki not getting paid enough, and I am absolutely, you know, none of us get paid enough. But, you know, and we love what we're doing, and we're completely passionate about it, and I think we make a difference in the people whose lives we touch. Question is, you know, does it shift the power system of institutions, the power system of who has a voice, the power system of money? I mean, you know, we could just talk about banks. I mean, my next exhibition is in a bank, so that's why I'm kind of thinking about it. But I mean, you know, you have criminality going on, and who, you know, total criminal actions that have brought down a country economically. Who's accountable? I mean, it's opening up a whole new thing, but next time.
But I'm afraid that there is some truth to that, and sometimes, you know, if you ask the question directly, does it change the power system? I'm not sure it does. And of course, it's hard for me to say because that's what I do. So it's almost like admitting total failure. But I still think that it's the right thing to do, and I still think that with time, maybe it will change it, because if I didn't think that, then it would be totally, you know, useless. But I think we're not quite there yet. So I guess the answer is no, it does not change the process.
I just want to go back to this, back to where we started, the ethics and definition of collaboration. I think there's two definitions of collaboration. One is the negative definition of collaboration, which is basically deed your power over to another. And this is how we collaborate with the enemy, okay? Whether it be the market, or whether it be an authoritarian state, or what have you. But there's also a very radical definition of collaboration, which I actually think can be transformative and change power, which is the collaboration that we've been talking about, which is this idea of actually engaging with others, listening to what they're having to say, and creating something which is not yours or mine, but a synthetic product of both people or many people's idea. And it is not what we have at this moment. What we have is we have a discussion where everybody is saying, look at me. Saying looking at me is not working together to try to create something radically different. And I think that there is a potentiality in this very idea of collaboration, which is quite radical. It's not going to change things today, but we are so far behind in this notion of essentially, is it about the individual or is it about the group? That moving towards this notion that we can all be part of the discussion, and out of that discussion can come real substantive change, I think is a very radical act.
Would you, as the moderator, like to close the discussion? Thank you, and thank everybody.
Thank you everyone for coming.